The clang of metal striking the floor rang out across the hall, drawing startled glances. "If she fixes it, I'll eat my degree," CEO Maxwell Thorne declared, as he flung a wrench at the feet of a woman clad in a simple white blouse and worn jeans. Before him stood an audience of 200 MIT engineers, tech journalists, and countless live-stream viewers, all erupting in laughter at the spectacle. The woman, Eleanor Vance, was an unknown. No credentials, no reputation, just a name no one had heard until that moment. On stage beside her was the R7000 engine, a $2 million prototype that had baffled the company's top engineers for 3 days. With clenched teeth, Thorne issued his challenge. Fix it in 30 minutes and earn his public concession, or fail and leave the premises permanently. Amid flickering lights and amused murmurs, Eleanor said nothing. Instead, she calmly bent down, picked up the wrench with a hand scarred by an old explosion, and got to work. Few knew much about Eleanor's life. She lived alone in a modest apartment on McGrath Street in East Detroit, where the sound of train horns intertwined with winter winds that crept through cracked window frames. Each morning at 5, she brewed black coffee in a chipped mug and sat silently by the window, her eyes drifting toward an abandoned factory from the 1980s. She spent her days shelving books in the public library, tutoring children, and reading stories to the blind. To neighbors, she was simply kind Miss Eleanor, neatly dressed, quiet, never speaking of her past. One elderly resident once remarked that Eleanor seemed to carry a sorrow, like a shadow she could never set down. No one suspected she had once been recognized as a prodigy by NASA. When she applied to Thorne Aerospace, the state's most prestigious firm, eyebrows were raised. She hadn't sought a senior role or a consultancy, but instead applied as a junior technician, an entry-level job typically reserved for recent graduates. Her resume was minimal: self-taught education, experience repairing vehicles at small garages, and no formal certifications. During the interview, HR manager Stephen Ross looked puzzled and asked, "No degree? No documents?" Eleanor met his gaze, unshaken. "Some things can't be measured by a diploma," she replied. "Like passion." Though dismissed as a dreamer, she was soon given a chance to prove herself in Thorne's screening lab, a space engineered to expose pretenders. A turbine engine sat disassembled, its internal systems rearranged to confuse even seasoned experts. Eleanor entered with nothing in hand, relying solely on observation. Within minutes, she noticed a subtle knock from the combustion chamber, gently adjusted the compression latch, and calmly identified 6 configuration errors, 2 of which the company's own team had missed. She completed the challenge in just 14 minutes, well below the time limit. Quietly, her name began circulating in Thorne's offices. During a routine executive meeting on the top floor, Maxwell Thorne came across a technical report bearing her name. "Who is she?" he demanded. The chief engineer responded cautiously. "No degree, but she diagnosed intricate faults using only sound and engine pressure readings." Thorne skimmed the report, his expression hardening as something unreadable flickered in his eyes. "She's not better than my MIT engineers," he muttered. "She can't be." Standing abruptly, he buttoned his jacket. "Set up a public trial. Bring the press, cameras, everyone." A faint smirk curved his lips. "Let them see that passion alone won't fix aerospace engines." What Maxwell Thorne failed to realize was that what Eleanor Vance carried within her wasn't just passion, it was a truth he wasn't yet prepared to confront. 3 days after the test, she received an email with no subject line and a single sentence. "Care to show your skills? Friday, main hall, 10 a.m. She didn't need context to understand it. This wasn't a genuine opportunity, it was a calculated ambush. The auditorium was arranged like a product launch, complete with lights, cameras, and reporters. Engineers with MIT tags on their wrists filled the front row, and in the center stood the R7000, the same engine that had baffled Thorne's team for 3 days. Striding onto the stage, Thorne addressed the audience through a booming microphone, announcing that Eleanor, A woman with no degree and no known background would attempt to fix what even his elite team could not. The crowd responded with ridicule. "She might be good with cars," someone sneered, "but this isn't a garage." None of them knew the truth, that this engine was her own design, created half a decade ago. As Eleanor walked onto the stage, no one clapped. The overhead lights gleamed off the engine's polished surface, while nearly 200 pairs of eyes watched, eager to mock. One young engineer pointed to her right hand, permanently damaged from an explosion. "She's shaking," he whispered. Another chimed in sarcastically, "She probably learned engines from YouTube." The laughter rippled like a wave, while Thorne, arms folded, reiterated his challenge. 30 minutes. If she succeeds, I'll eat my degree." Eleanor remained silent. She placed her hand on the engine's casing, letting the faint rhythms guide her. In her mind, there was no audience, only the memory of NASA nights and Patrick's hand resting over hers, not to help, but to steal. She didn't come to win applause. She came to unearth a buried truth. Kneeling, she pressed her ear to the engine, reviving an old habit once ridiculed by her peers at NASA. But what she heard wasn't just mechanical noise, it was a memory. The frequency was wrong, the compression ratio misaligned, and the air ducts improperly configured. Then it hit her. This wasn't just any engine. It was Orion, her stolen prototype, a cheap, dangerous imitation built without real understanding. If launched at standard altitude, it would detonate within minutes. What she faced now wasn't just public humiliation, but the return of a betrayal that had cost her everything. Frozen in place, Eleanor clenched her damaged hand until it turned pale. She could walk away. No one would know the truth. But if she stayed quiet, that engine would fly, and people would die. Around her, faces smirked, MIT rings gleamed, and recorders captured every breath. Her mind drifted to Patrick, the man who once held her hand only to later trigger the false alarm that ruined her career. She remembered her NASA colleagues, the only ones who once believed in her brilliance, now convinced she was a fraud. With a deep breath, she made her choice: speak the truth or carry the weight of silence forever. 25 minutes remained. While the crowd expected her to step aside in defeat, she turned to Thorne and spoke with a calm resolve. "I need a Mituo digital regulator and a Fluke standard pressure calibrator. Now!" The hall fell into an uneasy hush. "How would she even know those are the exact tools needed?" an engineer mumbled. Without pausing, Eleanor's trembling hand moved quickly and precisely. Within half a minute, she had disassembled the pressure regulation unit. "Misalignment, phase discrepancy in resonance frequency," she explained, pointing to a barely visible dent. "At altitude, that becomes a resonance point. This engine will explode." A stunned silence followed. Thorne tried to speak, but she cut him off. "Either let me finish the repair or risk lives." No one dared laugh now. Thorne's voice returned, sarcastic and biting. "I suppose you know which end is up." Laughter resumed, cameras flashed, bloggers scribbled. The room braced for her failure. But Eleanor heard none of it. Her scarred hand moved with certainty, recalling not theory, but lived experience. Late nights, complex equations, grease-stained fingers, and the quiet awe of creation. From the sidelines, Olivia snorted, "Need help finding the engine cover? Or should we get someone qualified?" Yet Eleanor continued, unmoved. Eleanor's eyes remained steady, not because the miscalibration was insignificant, but because what she saw went far beyond technical error. It was theft. The design before her wasn't merely similar to her own. It was her original work, twisted, corrupted, and made dangerously unstable. The question was no longer whether she could fix the engine. It had become whether she would allow this distorted version of her creation to ever take flight. When someone asked, "Who are you?" Eleanor didn't respond with words. Instead, she turned to the control panel, her fingers moving with precise, practiced ease, issuing commands like a conductor guiding an orchestra. She stated with clinical calm, Compression ratio must be corrected to exactly 14.71. If it remains at 15.2, the combustion chamber will resonate at 6.3 kHz. Structural failure will occur within 4 minutes at cruising altitude. The audience froze. She continued without hesitation. Turbine speed, 97,300 RPM. Fuel injection, 23.7 microseconds. Bypass ratio, 5.1 to 1. In the front row, an MIT engineer leaned over and whispered in disbelief. No one could know those specs without access to the original design. Olivia Zhang clutched her pen tightly, while Edward Carter turned pale and glanced at Thorne, murmuring, "She didn't just repair this engine. She built it." Still, Eleanor said nothing. She hadn't entered this room needing their validation, only their attention. Laughter had vanished. Every eye followed her as she moved inside the exposed engine housing, her scarred hands tracing each component as if they were bones of her own body. Vibration frequency is off by 0.3 Hz. The back pressure return pipe is misaligned. Whoever assembled this has no understanding of thermal expansion at high altitude, she muttered, more to herself than to anyone. Olivia, bewildered, asked, "How do you know all this?" Eleanor met her gaze, not with pride or anger, but with the gravity of truth. "Because I designed the original. The Orion engine." NASA, 2019. A stunned hush swept through the room. Pens stilled, cameras dropped, and breath was collectively held. Eleanor had not come merely to repair a flawed engine. She came to reclaim what had been stolen. "NASA once called me the woman who would take us to Mars," she said steadily. "I was the lead propulsion systems engineer on the Orion project 5 years ago." Carter shook his head. "That can't be. Your name isn't on any of NASA's rosters." Eleanor nodded, her expression calm. "That's because it was erased. My name was stripped from every file, every patent, every meeting. Patrick Finch, my fiancé and colleague, stole my work and sold it to Lockheed for $50 million. A reporter in the back dropped her pen, as if she'd touched fire. "What you're looking at now is a flawed replica of what I once created." Her voice softened as she revisited that night. "I returned to the lab before our wedding and found Patrick downloading the Orion database. I asked him why. He smiled and said, 50 million. Lockheed wants it all, and they want me, not you." She raised her scarred right hand. "I tried to stop him. He triggered a false alarm, accused me of sabotage, and in the chaos, disabled the lab's safety systems. Then the explosion happened." Silence settled once more. Eleanor rolled up her sleeve, revealing thick, jagged scars running from wrist to elbow. "I didn't just lose my job. I lost the hand that helped me reach for the stars, and no one defended me, because I was a woman, and there was no paper trail left behind." Slowly, she pulled her sleeve back down, sealing away a chapter that had once defined her. Thorne finally spoke. "Why not fight? Why not reclaim your name, your legacy?" Eleanor looked at him, her voice calm and resolute. "Because with these scars and a shattered reputation, no court would believe me. I didn't come for revenge. I came because this engine, if flown, will kill people." She gestured toward the machine. "They copied Orion without understanding harmonic resonance at altitude. It's not a prototype, it's a bomb with wings." Without waiting for permission, she bent over and opened the pressure regulator panel. A nearby engineer warned, "Careful, that's sensitive." But Eleanor was already deep in the system, her hands moving with instinctual precision. She replaced the oscillation filter and inserted a modified sensor core. "Response delay must drop to 0.3 microseconds. Otherwise, harmonic resonance will cause detonation 6 minutes after takeoff." Carter froze. Olivia took a cautious step back. Credentials no longer mattered. Eleanor stood and wiped her hands with an old cloth. "Run the diagnostics again. This time, let the machine speak." A nervous engineer initiated the sequence. The engine hummed to life, a deep, even pulse like a heartbeat. All eyes turned to the display. Green indicators began lighting up one after another. Pressure, stabilized. Frequency, perfect. Compression, 14.7 to 1. Vibrations, neutral. A young engineer whispered, "It's flawless. Almost too flawless." Carter leaned back, stunned. She didn't just fix it. She resurrected it. Eleanor stood silently, watching her work come alive. The melody she had once composed through tears, calculations, and long nights in Houston. In that moment, she wasn't the erased name. She was the mind behind the miracle. Thorne, rooted in place, scanned the room, the readouts, then looked at Eleanor, the woman with scarred hands who had just rewritten every doubt. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Eleanor unclipped her hairpin, exposing a faint scar along her neck. Her voice was steady. "I'm the one who warned NASA about this resonance flaw 5 years ago. I wrote Orion's first control lines. I'm the one Patrick erased and replaced with names more acceptable on paper." From her pocket, she pulled a weathered NASA pin, engraved on the back with Ad Astra per Aspera, to the stars, through hardship. From that moment forward, no one in that hall would ever dare call Eleanor unqualified again. She stepped toward the main control console, her hands still trembling but her focus clear. She entered a series of commands, prompting the large LED screen to illuminate. The R7000 engine's source code filled the display. Engineers gasped. Thorne instinctively stepped back as Eleanor pointed to a single line. EM NASA 2019. Phase Sync Subroutine. Designed by E. Vance. Confidential. Backup key embedded. No one uttered a word as new lines of code began to populate the screen, each one marked with the EM NASA tag, embedded discreetly throughout the engine's core system. Eleanor broke the silence with a calm explanation. Every design she ever created included a concealed identifier, a safeguard against unauthorized replication. Then she raised her phone, revealing a document signed by one of DC's top legal firms, an official cease and desist notice addressed to Thorne Aerospace, citing copyright infringement and estimating damages at $500 million. But it wasn't the financial threat that froze the room. It was the words she spoke next. Thorne sank into his seat, sweat forming along his brow, while the engineers stood motionless and the journalists hesitated over their keyboards. Eleanor didn't display anger or triumph, only the composed resolve of someone who had already survived the worst. She held up the legal notice and, in one deliberate motion, tore it in half. She hadn't come seeking revenge or recognition. She came because letting this engine take flight could cost lives. Her voice dropped as she locked eyes with Thorne. She wouldn't repeat her past mistake, staying silent in the face of danger. This time she intended to set things right. And in that instant, Eleanor reclaimed far more than her name. She reclaimed the respect of a room that had once tried to erase her. Edward Carter was the first to speak, slipping off his MIT ring and clenching it in his fist before meeting Eleanor's gaze. He admitted that in 20 years of teaching engineering, the greatest lesson had just come from the woman he once dismissed. Olivia Zhang's voice shook as she addressed her with new reverence, apologizing for misjudging her. A young engineer who had once mocked her trembling hands looked down in shame and offered a quiet apology. Eleanor didn't respond with words, only a simple nod. Thorne stood slowly, like a man emerging from the rubble of his own arrogance, and offered her a place at Thorne Aerospace. But Eleanor, her tone gentle and clear, replied that what the company needed wasn't her. It was a culture willing to listen. Thorne, no longer the commanding CEO but a man finally facing his reflection, asked what title or salary might convince her. She shook her head and declined, explaining that she wasn't here for titles or compensation. She challenged the room instead, asking how many women held engineering roles at Thorne, how many non-Ivy League candidates made it past final interviews. Silence followed. Pointing to the engine, still running with flawless grace, she reminded them that machines don't care about degrees, gender, or background. They respond only to understanding. And that's what she valued, ensuring that the next generation would never be stripped of their right to believe in themselves. She picked up her old canvas bag, which held only a notebook, a pen, and a faded NASA pin, and quietly descended the stage. Her worn sneakers tapped against the floor, the only sound in a room of 200 silent observers. Olivia whispered, almost in awe, that they had tried to destroy a legend without ever knowing it. An older journalist scribbled that he had just witnessed the loudest silence in American engineering history. At the doorway, Eleanor turned back and left the room with a final message for anyone who had ever doubted themselves. Ability doesn't reside on a diploma. It lives in your hands and your heart. Then she walked away, leaving behind a room full of people who had never felt so small. By Monday morning, Eleanor was back at the local library by 7 a.m., unnoticed by the world she had just saved. Her white shirt was freshly laundered, and the NASA pin rested in her pocket, not as a badge, but as a quiet reminder of what she had once built and lost. "Miss Eleanor, will you tell us the Mars rocket story again?" a bright-eyed 8-year-old asked, grabbing her hand. With a soft smile, Eleanor pulled a solar system book from the shelf. "Today," she said, "we're going to build a jet engine using a plastic bottle and a rubber band." The children erupted in cheers. There were no headlines, no interviews, no awards. But in that cozy room filled with dusty books and young dreams, a woman once hailed as a genius was quietly igniting wonder again, right where belief had once flickered out. The atmosphere in the auditorium had shifted entirely, no longer filled with mockery but with unease and reflection. Thorne leaned toward Carter and muttered, "She knows too much. Run her file again. Make sure she's not a corporate spy." Though Eleanor heard every word, she didn't react. Her hands continued working, moving across the engine as if interpreting a silent language only she understood. Olivia stepped forward, voice low and cautious, warning her of removal for unauthorized access to classified designs. Eleanor met her gaze without hesitation. "This doesn't belong to you," she said firmly. "It's a stolen copy of a dream, and one that nearly killed me." Just then, a young engineer broke the tension. "If she's telling the truth, we're standing next to a bomb that's already ticking." The atmosphere in the room was motionless, as if time itself had paused. A security guard began to approach, but Olivia raised her hand, signaling him to wait, her expression torn between duty and doubt. Eleanor didn't retreat. She didn't even shift her weight. "I don't need belief," she said quietly. "Just attention." From her pocket, she produced a slim piece of metal, an airflow conduit from the original Orion prototype. "Check the material, the resonant frequency, the gas response lag. I engineered this to survive travel beyond Earth's orbit. That version," she nodded toward the R7000, "wouldn't make it past Denver." Edward Carter, once a vocal critic, stepped forward and accepted the conduit. As he held it against the current blueprint, his face transformed from skepticism to alarm. "My God, she's telling the truth." Thorne's jaw tightened, his fists clenched. "If she's right, Thorne Aerospace is finished." Eleanor's voice remained soft, but her words cut with clarity. "Only things built on arrogance collapse. The truth doesn't." The room was hushed, the tension thick, broken only by the occasional clink of metal. Here was a woman once dismissed, now restoring the very engine that symbolized her betrayal. She removed her jacket, exposing a scar-lined arm. Her hand, trembling from old nerve damage, moved with the unerring accuracy of someone who had turned pain into programming. She methodically disassembled the auxiliary combustion chamber, reworked airflow conduits, and recalibrated the regulator valves. "You don't have to believe me," she murmured. "Just watch what happens. If the combustion temperature drops by 12% and the pressure stabilizes at 11.3 bar, then I'm right." Moments later, the monitor blinked. Temp, 12.1%. Pressure, 11.29 bar. A silence heavier than any accusation followed. In that stillness, the weight of truth eclipsed every resume in the room. Eleanor wiped her hands with an old burlap cloth and walked toward the central console. "You want proof?" she said. "Not speeches, data, circuit layouts, code signatures." With a series of keystrokes, she brought up the original schematics, each bearing the unmistakable tag EM NASA 2019, repeated line after line in the code comments. Carter staggered back, pale. Olivia, barely audible, whispered, "Only the original designer would know those values." Eleanor turned to them, her gaze clear, not angry, just quietly devastating. "I wrote that code, and the man who erased my name was Patrick Finch." The room didn't gasp out of shock that something had gone wrong. It fell silent because they all realized they had chosen to trust credentials over truth. Eleanor keyed in one final command. The screen responded, "Engine test mode, ready." She looked around, not asking for permission, but creating space for what was about to happen. "If I'm wrong, it'll shake, lose rhythm, and overheat. But if I'm right, you'll hear what precision sounds like." She pressed enter. For a moment, nothing. Then, the engine roared to life. Clean, unwavering, perfectly balanced. The data streamed in. Temp, 942 degrees C, stable. Pressure, 1130 bar. Resonance match, 99.97%. James whispered with reverence, "No imposter could replicate that." Olivia turned her face away, eyes misted. Thorne let go of the table as if he'd just heard his own sentence read aloud. Eleanor remained silent. The engine was speaking now, in a language only its creator could have taught it. She approached the console again, opened a secondary screen, and zoomed into the metadata. Comment after comment. EM NASA 2019. She typed a few final commands, and a video appeared, surveillance footage from 5 years prior, capturing Patrick Finch inside a NASA lab, copying classified data, unaware of the backup camera that had recorded it all. "I keep the original on an offline hard drive," she explained, turning toward Thorne. "The person who handed this design to Lockheed was Patrick. The company that paid for it, knowingly or not, was Thorne Aerospace. Not because it was believable, but because people like me weren't." Richard's face turned ghostly pale, lips compressed. I didn't know." Eleanor's voice remained gentle, void of resentment. "Not knowing doesn't absolve you, but refusing to know, that's the real danger." Her words weren't an attack. They were a mirror held up to the room's bias. Then, without drama, she placed her phone on the conference table. The screen lit up with the title, "Copyright Lawsuit, Thorne Aerospace versus Eleanor Vance. Claim $500 million USD. Thorne's voice cracked, half shocked, half defeated. "You had this prepared all along." Eleanor gave a quiet nod. "I never forgot," she said, her voice steady. "I was just waiting to see if anyone else remembered." Her eyes swept across the room where once proud faces now stared at the floor. "I could take this lawsuit public, dismantle your entire company in court, but even then, kids like me would still be shut out because they didn't go to the right schools, come from the right families, or belong to the right circles." With a long press, she deleted the lawsuit from her phone. The silence that followed was stunned and absolute. "I didn't come to win," she continued. "I came to ask whether you're ready to fix this engine. or fix the way you see someone like me. In that moment, the room's recognition didn't come from legal defeat or public exposure, but from a deeper silence, the kind that arrives when pride is stripped bare and humility takes its place. Turning off the control panel, Eleanor placed her phone into her worn canvas bag. No one tried to stop her. No one offered thanks or apology. As she walked slowly toward the exit, each step seemed to peel away another layer of prejudice they had cloaked her in. "I don't need an apology," she said. Just don't laugh next time someone like me walks through that door." Maxwell Thorne stood frozen, eyes blank. Edward Carter lowered his head. Olivia Jang cried silently, as if she had just failed the most important exam of her career. Eleanor opened the door, and the soft afternoon light of Detroit spilled in, golden and quiet. Without turning, she spoke one last time. "I no longer need anyone to fix the mistakes done to me. I need you to stop repeating them with the next person." Then she left. There was no applause, only a silence, heavy with consequence. The door had barely closed when a trembling hand gripped the back of a chair, and a man stood up. It was Howard Page, a 72-year-old aviation journalist who had attended the Orion unveiling in 2019. "I know her," he said. "5 years ago, I wrote an article called Eleanor Vance, The Heart of the Journey to Mars. I watched her present the resonance theory, the same one you dismissed today as fraud." All eyes turned to him as he unfolded a yellowed newspaper clipping. Though faded, one line remained bold: "Eleanor Vance, NASA Chief Propulsion Engineer." At last, someone remembered. And sometimes, all the truth needs is one person to remember it correctly for it to come alive again. The next morning, a 47-second clip surfaced on TikTok. Titled simply, "The Unqualified Woman Who Fixed a $1 million Engine and Silenced a Room," it featured Eleanor adjusting parameters with her trembling, scarred hand as the engine purred flawlessly behind her. The video, recorded by the same MIT student who had once mocked her, included a caption: "I used to believe in degrees. Now I believe in truth. And yesterday I met it. Her name is Eleanor Vance." Within 48 hours, the video had 12 million views. #WhoIsEleanor became the top trending hashtag in the U.S. NASA announced a review of 2019 archives. Thorne Aerospace issued a public statement. "We are investigating the full chain of our technology acquisitions." Eleanor no longer needed to shout to be heard. For the first time in 5 years, the world had started listening. Across social media, engineers, students, especially women, began to share their own stories about being silenced, dismissed, or overlooked. "I was told my voice was too soft. I designed most of the project, but my male boss told me to stand and smile. My boyfriend laughed when I said I wanted to study aerospace." A 17-year-old girl in Texas, once denied an aviation scholarship, posted a photo of herself assembling a model engine made of recycled plastic. The caption read, "Thank you, Eleanor. I won't stop anymore." NASA reopened its mentorship program for girls. MIT introduced a new scholarship called the Eleanor Initiative. Through one act of quiet defiance, Eleanor ignited something no explosion ever could: belief. Invitations flooded in from NASA, MIT, airlines, even the UN. She declined them all. "I once fell from the top," she explained. "The place I want to return to is the one where I was never judged." On Monday morning, Eleanor walked back into the East Detroit Public Library with her canvas bag, a clean white shirt, and her usual chipped ceramic mug of diluted coffee. A young girl approached with a steam engine puzzle. "Miss Eleanor, it won't spin. I don't know why." Eleanor smiled and knelt beside her. "Then let's take it apart together and fix it. Like real engineers do, okay?" And so, without titles or fame, Eleanor taught the world a simple truth. An engineer isn't who you claim to be. It's what you quietly repair when no one's watching. In a high school science class in Indiana, when a teacher asked who inspired them to become engineers, no one said Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. A brown-skinned boy stood up, rubbing the back of his head. "Miss Eleanor," he said. "She made sure the engine didn't explode. No one died, and no one cried from being embarrassed." The class laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that carries admiration. In the library's leadership section sat a quiet, unbest-selling book, the one who didn't need to win, only to be right. Eleanor didn't know, and she didn't need to, because when something true plants itself in the human heart, it doesn't require fame. It only needs to last long enough to become a standard others can aspire to. Eleanor didn't win any public accolades. She didn't return to NASA. She didn't reclaim her title. She just fixed one engine, then quietly left. But in doing so, she didn't just restore a machine. She awakened a system numbed by its own bias. She didn't shout about her worth. She let the engine do the speaking. And in the silence that followed, the world finally heard her. Eleanor Vance isn't a hero in a cape. She's a reminder that you don't need others to believe in you immediately. You only need to keep believing in what's right. And maybe that's the question for the rest of us. When overlooked for lack of prestige, gender, or reputation, would you walk away, or quietly tighten each bolt until the day it all runs, and runs right? If this story stirred something in you, share it. Because somewhere out there, another Eleanor is waiting for someone to believe before the world catches up.